All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the RTS podcast. It returns. Here we are once again, and we're excited now to talk about some video games, but in particular, talk about RTS games. So joining me today, we'll introduce the people here. Brian, Clare, do you want to give a brief summary of what you've done? Because you're like an actual industry veteran, right? Like I'm just a dude who made YouTube videos, and then Brad was like, hey, I like you.
Yeah, yeah. So I've been in the industry for at least 20 years now. Started as a journalist, ran the Adrenaline Vault website in the 90s, and then I moved to Stardock in the early 2000s, where I'm now the director of publishing. Um, I've helped design and work on like Galactic Civilization series, Sins of Solar Empire, Ashes of Singularity, and pretty much gaming is all I do.
Party on. All right, what about you, Topher?
I'm Topher. I have been writing for about RTS for about 5 years, and I've done QA for about, I think, 7 different RTS games as well. So I've had the chance to not quite up to the 20 years of experience, but I've done my tiny bit of making sure things don't get too buggy when they need fixing.
Nice.
Magpie?
Hi, yeah, I'm Magpie. I've been playing RTS since I was like a little kid, and then a couple of years ago I was like, wouldn't it be really cool if I could cast RTS? So I started a YouTube channel and started doing that, and somehow some people liked it, and here I am.
Yeah, we've co-casted a few times, good times. And Magpie was actually on the first podcast I ever did. It was us helping Hans and Tenchi. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was a good time.
Yeah. All right, well, so I have talked about accessibility of RTS games, more specifically the issues with that. And I think that was a really good conversation. Some really good ideas were put forward by Melter. I like the way that he talked about, the conceptualization of how you can try to like anchor players into the game. And I think I got to the heart of like the delayed gratification and the self-directed or the lack of external gratification is the problem. But I wanted to see what these guys have to say, their take on this issue. So I'm going to frame the question in a little bit of a different way. So I'll start by asking Magpie, if you were to make a new RTS tomorrow, what would that be from a business model perspective? Like how would you try and circumvent that issue of accessibility? Like what would your new player ramp look like?
Wow, that's a really good question.
I did warn you though, didn't I? I was like, I'm going to ask you this question. Think about it.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay, sweet. Well, I mean, I didn't get that warning.
Oh.
But I could take a jump. I think like the problem right now, I think with RTS is that everybody who's interested in it are the people of a certain age. They're basically people of our demographic who grew up with like Command and Conquer and Starcraft and Total Annihilation and all that stuff. So that's why RTS is like a genre for us, to us. But to people who grew up after that, they don't really have like those roots. So I think like you need to make it like you need to have features of the RTS that people who didn't have that background will want. And I think those features are, I think you need to like have a MOBA style of gameplay. So I think if somebody can be like playing RTS, but then you can also have MOBA units that other players can choose to control in the RTS, I think that's like a really big idea space that no one's explored yet. Like if I can be building a base and microing like creeps, if you like, while somebody else controls heroes, I think that could be a really interesting area. And I also think that you need a game engine which is much better at recognizing when the players make significant game actions and flashing them up on screen, because the present gaming generation know and expect that like throughout every single game. When you get a headshot in Battlefield, it's like headshot, you got it, you get all these bonus points. When you like do anything in any other game, it's like you did this stuff. But when I'm playing Starcraft, it doesn't say like you did a medevac drop and it got some kills. It's just like, nope, there's no. So you need stuff flashing up in game, preferably with XP numbers. And that sounds super shallow, but that is actually pretty much what like the newer gaming generation, just like without that, they just find it hard to identify, I think. So I don't know, that'll be 2 places to start. I don't know how much of a business plan that is.
I certainly agree with the gratification. That's sort of what I was mentioning last time is, with RTS, you have to find your own gratification. It isn't given to you in a way that it is in other games, like other genres. Like a MOBA, even as difficult and as complex and stressful as MOBAs are, like when you get a double kill. Where with an RTS, you have to spend like X amount of time, playing it, and then you got to extrapolate the gratification itself. I mean, the issue I think with trying to make RTS like a sort of spin it off in a different direction is that like it's been done and it's failed. Like, is there a single RTS that's tried to mobify itself and it just hasn't sort of fallen on its face?
Air Mech, but that's not that big of a community. That's the only one that I've known that was good.
Yeah,
Well,
I did.
don't know. I mean,
I did
you're
like
right,
Air Mech.
You're right. There hasn't been a good example of it. But then again, I would argue that nobody's actually done it very well yet. Like, nobody's actually done it in a way which opens up new gameplay space or is like appealing or entertaining. They've just kind of like mashed two things together and it's like, oh, that didn't work. Like, I don't know. I still think that there is a solution there. I just don't think we found it yet.
Yeah.
Well, the risk of failure from a business standpoint is so high now. If you try something like that and you fail, it's pretty much game over.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like Steam was like 5 years ago, where if you got on there, you were pretty much guaranteed to make $100,000. Now, you can get on there and sell literally 3 copies, and that's just doom.
So what do you think, Topher? How would you approach the issue of accessibility?
Well, he made an interesting point about how like putting up like you did such and such as a reward, but I think in RTS that's really hard to do because like say in Starcraft, like you mentioned, like you did a medevac drop or something like that. You may have accomplished that, but that may have been the wrong move. In a first-person shooter, a headshot is good in 99.9% of situations, but completing a drop successfully may have been the wrong strategic decision to make or the wrong tactical decision to make. And so building that into the gameplay, you'll get rewarded, but it may have hurt you in the game. So I'm not sure how you could, because how you'd properly reward players without potentially giving them a reward for doing something that was the wrong decision. And so that's where my head is kind of right now on that topic, because the RTS is so broad that what may seem good to a pre-programmed, reward system or achievements may not be the right decision in the game. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think maybe we should expand just for people who aren't familiar with StarCraft. So what he's saying is if you have a really cost-efficient engagement, you kill 1,000 minerals worth of units and you lose 200 minerals worth of units, like great, but you haven't macroed for 30 seconds, and so you're floating resources, you're not producing units. Like if you neglect your base building, that can make it worse for you than if you had a great engagement but were neglecting those things. But that's actually a really good counter argument that because I was sort of on board with that train of like, yeah, if you sort of show like some little pop-up in game that says like you won this engagement, but that wouldn't work in a game as complex as StarCraft, but it would work in many others, like Company of Heroes, for example, because that's just more action oriented and there isn't that complex macro to neglect.
And I also think in some games, say like in Company of Heroes, a good move should be visualized. So if you make a good grenade throw, or you flank a tank, it should be visually reflected in what actually happens in the gameplay. And it'd be nice if there was a little pop-up or something, but I think, and it's obviously very hard to do, but I think in a well-designed game, when you make a good play, it should visually be just obvious to the player that they've done well. A good grenade versus a bad grenade in Company of Heroes is fairly obvious if you're watching.
Yeah, well, there is actually the presentation there. Like, so when you get a rear armor hit, it actually does flash text that says rear armor.
Exactly.
And,
it does. I never noticed that.
No, it's like it's text, so it's done kind of clumsily, but like it's there. And I mean, as for grenades, like you can see people die. I think there may also even be XP. Like I know in Co 1 the experience pops up because you get experience for like General's Point or the wrong game, the command points or whatever. So I think Company of Heroes does that well, actually. Like I think when a tank blows up, it is very visually gratified, like how nice the effect looks. Brian, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. Part of the problem is, and we can come up with a lot of potential solutions, but I mean, they just don't work for every game, right? Like a lot of the in-your-face feedback that we were talking about earlier. I mean, that just wouldn't work for a game that's trying to be more serious, like, for instance, Ashes of Singularity. I can't even imagine that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a very nuanced problem, right? You have to address it not only, to on a business level, but also, make your solution work to fit in with the game that you actually want to make.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, and a large scale game would be harder to do because you don't want to draw attention to these like little text pop-ups when you're playing at strategic zoom level. That wouldn't make sense. I mean, so
right. You wouldn't see them.
Yeah, this is what I've thought about, and you guys can chime in. I think what works really well is like mini games. So a great example of that in Starcraft 2 is the co-op they have, and the co-op is actually it's like a mini game inside of Starcraft, where rather than just like, hey, here's a 2v2 and you verse some AI, it's like, effectively a campaign mission, but rather than you playing as a regular Starcraft faction, you play as a very simplified faction. So you have like a much smaller roster of units. You only maybe have like 4 or 5, 6 units. And the way the macro works, rather than building a marine every 15 seconds for the cost of 50 minerals, you build you spend 1,000 minerals every minute, and then it gives you 20 marines. So it takes that macro management of producing units, makes it way more easier. You don't have to expand, so you don't have to like build supply depots, I'm pretty sure. It takes away all those micro chores and all of those complexities, and allows you to just kind of focus more on like an action-oriented game where you're interacting with your teammate a lot more. It makes it like a lot more of an action-oriented arcadey game, but it doesn't then. That's not the entire game, so it doesn't lack the depth to keep you interested in the long run. Because then once you sort of go through that early introduction to the more casual game mode, you can then just play the regular StarCraft, which is incredibly difficult. And in Ashes of the Singularity, I mean, we have this like tower defense game mode called King of the Hill, and I think that would work really well as an introductory game mode, because it takes away a lot of the complexity. You don't have to worry about harassment and expansion. It's more just build base defenses and hold out. And I also really loved the in Dawn of War 2, there was the Last Stand, that mini game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was a little different because that was like just a full RPG. It didn't have really any RTS elements, but I think I guess some of the heroes did. You controlled like other dudes, but like I think you could take an RTS game. You don't want to gut out its complexity because then you're left with no substance. But I think you can take a portion of the game and have that as its own separate thing. And MOBAs do this too. So League of Legends has ARAM, all random, all middle, where you don't have to worry about ganking, compositions, roles. You just sort of pick, you get assigned a random hero and you goof around. So I think one way of fixing the issue with RTS, but without compromising the game design, is these introductory casual game modes.
I think I agree with that. I think if you look at the most successful and long-lasting RTS games, they're generally ones that are more of a platform than just a singular mode. Like StarCraft has their campaign, they have the multiplayer, they have Against AI, they have co-op, they have the arcade. Company of Heroes 1 and 2 both had their campaign and multiplayer, and then they also had a variety of other modes. I think Company of Heroes, one of their expansions, even had a MOBA mode.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of it. I know what you mean, though. It was pretty good.
And yeah, they have mini campaigns, and they have co-op missions, and Company of Heroes 2 has the Ardennes Assaulter or whatever, which is another very good campaign. So I think it's obviously much more expensive, and bigger studios can do it better than small ones, but having your game be a platform for a variety of game modes is obviously you create a much bigger net to draw people in with.
I would agree with that. I mean, ideally, if you can swing it, definitely. I think that would be very successful. I think we've actually seen that be successful. Like you said, the Last Stand mode was one of the things my friends and I love to play the most in Dawn of War 2.
Yeah, and it's a good way to introduce people to the game. Like, again, it could be better if it was more RTS-y, but even just the controls. And that's like the RTS controls is something that people are not familiar with. So not only are they learning how to like the mechanics of the RTS. They're also learning about left click select, right click, dragging a box to select things, the camera, and so you take, which sounds simple to us, right? But it's for people that have never played RTS games before, it's kind of weird. It's sort of abstracted. You don't have that like locked camera in the way that you do in like RPGs and MOBAs. There isn't as much to keep track of. I think the Last Stand, it gets you hooked, and it also introduces you to like the lore. Like, oh, this is an Imperial Guard, this is a Space Marine. So even if you're not necessarily selling them the RTS, even if you're just selling them like the assets of the game and like the lore and like what the heroes do and such, and then because if you want to see more of that hero, well, you can play the actual game and you upgrade your Force Commander to a Power Fist or whatever.
Right. And I mean, what particularly, it's kind of getting off track, in Last Stand, I thought that Relic kind of missed the ball a little bit in that mode. That particular mode was so much fun. They could have done a lot more with it than they did. I mean, they could have put out DLC for it. They could have expanded on it more. It seems like they did it, but it was kind of like a nifty afterthought.
Well, they did though. I mean, there was a second map added, and they released the Tau Commander, I think it was a Necron Commander at one point.
I bought them all, but they could have done a lot more than.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on like the age when it came out, right? I mean, it first came out with games for Windows Live, which is really dating it, right?
Yeah.
Today, I mean, I think if Relic did it, you'd probably see like 10, 15 DLC, because it's just a money-making machine if people really enjoy it.
Yeah, they also made it a standalone game, and I don't know how successful that was. I mean,
I'm not sure either.
I had more problems with it, and like the problem that I had with it is up to a certain point, you just sucked, because when you were level 1, you didn't even have all of your gear. Like until you were level 7, then you had all of your slots, let alone the fact that like being level 16, you just had objectively better gear. But
yeah,
I think there was a lot of potential there, but
well, that kind of brings me to the question of like a lot of this is focused on multiplayer, obviously, because that's one of the most talked about in sections of an RTS, the genre. But one thing I was talking about with a couple other people was, does multiplayer have to be the end game for the RTS like population where you funnel people to, or can you funnel people to different sections and still keep a wide population without?
I think co-op is a bit more, and not necessarily like PvP, but I think co-op there's more longevity in that.
Well, and I mean that's what with Starcraft 2, Blizzard has said that co-op is more popular than their ladder, and obviously Starcraft 2 has the largest multiplayer ladder of any RTS game, and so I do think obviously I get the most enjoyment out of just one-on-one ladder experience from an RTS. But when you're designing an RTS, should ladder be your main focus for the end game for your players? Is that where you should funnel all your players to, or should you try to sift them where they'll find the most enjoyment? And I don't know the answer. I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, I think it depends on the kind of game you want to make, and particularly where you want it to go after that single player mode is done. I mean, Blizzard's kind of lucky, I mean, they basically have unlimited resources thanks to World of Warcraft. So they had a really solid single player campaign, which made people like me happy. And then they had the multiplayer ladder because they wanted StarCraft to be competitive for the Korean market. So they had that going for them. Plus they have the regular multiplayer mode with the co-op, which makes other people happy. So I mean, they can kind of do it all. Ultimately, I think it really just depends on what would work best for the game. For instance, like I worked in Sins of Solar Empire, and people have asked for years. They was like, "Well, you should do competitive multiplayer." It's like the games are literally 4 to 6 hours long minimum. You cannot do competitive multiplayer. I'm sorry, it makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
But with something that was a lot shorter, where the matches were maybe only 20, 30 minutes, then you could see it. But by and large, I hate to say it because it makes me sound so old. It boils down more to a business decision almost than anything else in the industry right now, because the creative guys can be creative as much as they want, but honestly, it's the accountants who call the shots.
And obviously, Sega, Relic, or Blizzard have more money than the average
Oh yeah,
company are going to throw at it. So there's a reason those are the bigger platforms.
right.
So.
I don't know if product design necessarily has to be expensive, though, because going back to, I mean, obviously it depends how you want to do it, but let's going back to King of the Hill, like, that's just a scenario that was made by a designer in an XML, and I've since gone back recently and I've changed it and improved it a lot, and like, a bunch of these little mini scenarios, so long as you have, a somewhat easy way of doing it, like you could churn out all of these like really fun introductory actiony game modes. Like you wouldn't be able to have them as flashy as like the co-op in Starcraft that has all these not cutscenes, but it has these like characters talking to you and these big flashy effects. But I think if you start off creating a really good game, like we're gonna make this game awesome, and then you're funneling things out of that game and then giving it to a player in an easier means. Like, it's, again, take ARAM in League of Legends. What is ARAM? ARAM is League of Legends with one lane and random heroes. Like, that doesn't have to be expensive from a development perspective.
Well, no, it's the same game. I guess more of the question, to kind of get back to the point, is do you have to design the game with that kind of endpoint in mind from the get-go, or can you add that in later? Because it's like, for most developers, you don't want to put in the expense for no purpose.
Yeah.
So it's not like if you build it, they will come. They probably won't come, and that's a lot of developers have found that out. So how do you get there without
and I do think like adjusting helps, because Blizzard's slow reaction to Dota and Warcraft 3 and Starcraft 1 obviously was a failure on their part to not look at what the community was doing. And obviously having community assets and community programs makes a game have longevity as well.
Right.
I think it's okay for the introductory game mode to be the endpoint for players, and a lot of times it will be. Like, I know people who only play ARAM in League of Legends. Like, they just don't play the regular game. They just play ARAM. And so, I mean, these introductory game modes, you would have to make them compelling in their own right. You wouldn't have to just make them just a dumbed down version. You would have to give them something interesting. But yeah, then how do you draw them from one of those to the full game? I mean, that's sort of difficult. I think you can have like the different sort of game modes do different things. Like, this one's all about defense. This one is all about offense. And then like, it's obviously a really simplified abstraction. But I think you can introduce all of the game mechanics to the player through these modes. And then it's also like, even if there's still a lot for them to learn, once they understand the game and understand the mechanics, then they can get that gratification in the way that they wouldn't have if they just had started playing and didn't know what was happening. Mm-hmm. Magpie, I think you're a little bit left out here. Do you want to chime in?
No. Like, dude, you guys have super interesting stuff to say. I'm just sitting here like reflecting and going like, that's really interesting. Like, I've never thought about it like that. You guys have a lot of perspective, but it's really interesting. See what you guys say about like breaking it down into like the kind of like smaller versions of RTS, like kind of like, I don't know, like breaking it down into little units, having these mini games, and like what we've got with Starcraft. Like, somebody said, I think Topher said that the co-op is now more popular than the ladder, and I was like, wow. And then I was like, no, actually, because just this last 2 weeks, I've introduced like some of my friends who have been like so like reticent and so like anti-Starcraft, and I was just like, look, it's free now. Why don't we just try this co-op thing? And then like I introduced a few of them. They're now playing it without me. They're like asking about the multiplayer. They're like tuning into WS Austin. They're like, hey, did you see that thing? And I'm like, whoa, this really works. Like, this is kind of amazing. All my friends were like really like not anti-Starcraft, but they were just like, man, I'm not a Korean pro gamer. I'm never gonna get it. Now they're just kind of interested in it because they've discovered that it's fun. So I think like, breaking it down, making it like less imposing, and like also like, at least in the beginning, staying away from the big screen that says like, you lose, like the other guy was better. It's like, if we can just avoid that for like the first 2 weeks of play, I think people just get into it. I think, so it's actually, this is like a whole way into RTS, which is really interesting that I've never really sat and thought about, and it's pretty cool.
See, that's why I really like not only King of the Hill in Ashes, but also The Last Stand in Dawn of War 2, is because it's an endless survival. Well, I guess The Last Stand technically isn't, but it practically is. At least when you're new, is that like losing is inevitable. You don't really win. You just sort of see how long you can hold out for. And what that means is it removes the failure state, because like, yeah, you've lost, but well done. You survived for 10 minutes.
Yeah, you go in knowing you're going to fail.
Yeah, and it sort of it actually gives you that like defeatism of like, ha, wow, I just got so wrecked, and like a lot more than if you know that you had the potential to win, but then you failed and someone else beat you instead. Like that.
That's like, yeah, sorry.
I think there's also like a really alarming stat. I can't remember what game this was from, but it was like 87% of players who play like a multiplayer game and then lose don't play it again.
Wow.
Well, like
Yeah,
on their
brutal.
first go if they lose.
Yeah. I don't remember what game it was, and that number was just sort of I couldn't remember, but like it was the point was most people who lose a game like on their first game will never play again, like a multiplayer.
That is absolutely true. I used to work a retail job selling like product, like board games to people, and like the first rule was like when you show somebody a game, they always win. Like they just always win, because if you're gonna try and sell them that thing, like that is like super vital. So yeah, I think that's totally true.
Yeah. So, well, what was the other thing that StarCraft 2? I mean, how does that handle the co-op? How does that handle failure? Is it just really easy?
In co-op, it starts out being pretty easy. It's like slow game speed, and if you start it on like the normal difficulty, then like me and a friend or two of my friends who've never played StarCraft before have like a super good chance of not losing. Like, and they've never really gotten into StarCraft. And then
So that
once
makes
you
sense.
actually have the basic skills down, you can turn it up to the harder skills, and then even for someone like me who's like a bit of an RTS veteran, then it's quite challenging. So that's like a really nice ramp, and my friends get to like come with me on that journey, so I can like help them in the first place. Be like, oh, now you should build a pylon. Oh, maybe we can move out on the map, and then they're like, let's turn up the difficulty, Fredman. Like do some more macro, like get out there.
Yeah. So go on.
The co-op also has experience, so as you level up, you get new units or powers, and your first time you play, even on the lowest difficulty, you're going to get something after the mission. And so even if you lose, you're going to get something new. And so you're like, oh, I lost, but I got this new unit I can try out, or this new power. And so it kind of like, oh, I lost, but there's something new that made me stronger.
That's a great point, actually. It's one of the things I was thinking about, just in terms of general accessibility of getting people into RTSs, and it goes back to that gratification point, right? So it's almost that cross between RTS and RPG, where you gain the experience, whether you win or lose, you gain something, and you're earning your way towards a reward. So you see that you're actually making progress, and maybe you unlock something, or maybe you don't, but you're going to get something eventually. I don't mean like loot boxes, because that's just nasty these days. But it's actually Last Stand did this too. You would actually gain levels and then unlock stuff. But I think that's in terms of immediate reward and gratification and just getting people get into the larger RTS scape is definitely a very good thing. I think more companies should probably do that. And Blizzard's obviously a pro at it. They've been doing it forever.
Yeah, Company of Heroes 2 did that. Dawn of War 3 did it, and they stuffed it up the way they handled it. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a little depressing in a sense that like everything should have progression, because it's sort of like it makes people sound stupid, but it is true. Like I can't argue against that. I mean,
and handling it correctly matters too.
Yeah, that's
handling
a
correctly
good
is very
distinction.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with The Last Stand, the reason why that works really well is because when you ranked up, it wasn't just like, congrats, you do an extra 3% more damage now.
Yeah.
What it was is, well, you have this new weapon, and that
Yeah.
can completely change the way that you play, because you have certain utility and synergy between different gear. So, like, you'd have a flamethrower, but the flamethrower wasn't very good unless you could teleport. And, like, now you've got a good combination here. It's because you could teleport away, you could burn them, teleport, and so when you unlock something new, it makes you want to play more, because, well, now I've got to try this different playstyle. Will I prefer the melee playstyle? Will I prefer playing at ranged with the flamethrower, with the Gatling gun? So even if you're playing the same character, it unlocks all these different ways of playing. I don't know
Assault
how.
cannon.
Yeah, it'd be a bit harder to do that, I think. Like, well, because what I'm thinking of is, like, I love King of the Hill and Ashes, but two things we don't have. I mean, first thing, we don't have the progression. We also don't have co-op. Like if we had co-op in King of the Hill, that would be really kick-ass. But with like progression in like, how do you do that in an RTS where you unlock new buildings? I mean, I guess you could do it like with units, because you have units that you can get in King of the Hill that aren't as important. Like, really it's about building defenses and then a juggernaut. And so like, how would you introduce progression in a game like King of the Hill for Ashes? I don't know if you guys have played that, so it might be better for you to chime in.
I mean, obviously I played it.
Yeah, right.
But, I mean, you could. I think you could get progression by unlocking, new defensive buildings, upgrades for the defensive buildings. Without going to like a full level up system, you could do that. That would work into the existing gameplay. I mean, we kind of already have it.
If you imagine, like, just as an example, when you're playing Diablo, you guys must be familiar with Diablo, okay? And you have your skill tree, and when you level up, you can spend points on the tree, but you can also like undo all those points and then put them in a different tree, try like a different loadout, So as you're playing, you're unlocking like additional skill points, additional levels. That's unlocking like new abilities, but at any point you can also try like a different loadout. Imagine now that your faction in your preferred RTS has like a skill tree with different structures, units, and upgrades for those structures and units. And as you're leveling up to begin with, you're getting more points to spend. And then later on, you're like saying, hey, you know what? I might take it all out of these structures and units and try something completely different this evening. Like that's a sort of progression system you could have in like mode. Oh, can you guys hear me? My screen's just went blank.
Yep.
I can.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, I can't see you guys, but I'm just going to keep speaking. So yeah, that's like a progression system that you could have. And also, I just think, like, whilst we're talking about progression, one thing I'd like to say, which might be obvious to you guys, but no one's said it yet, is that, like, I think essentially in any gaming audience, there's like two kinds of people. There's the kinds of people who like the reward, the core experience they're after is the competitive, like head to head, like they derive reward from beating other people. And that's great. It's fantastic. It's cool to watch, and it's we love RTS, so we love that. And then there's the progressive gamers who want that sense of progress. They want I've been playing this on Monday night and I unlock this thing, and then I play on Tuesday night and I use that thing and I make some progress and I beat that boss, and so on. And actually, I think in terms of audience share, the progressives is way larger. So when we're talking about accessibility, it's like one of the most important things is that we can somehow make RTS appeal to these progressive players. And I think I'm beginning to understand what Tofu was saying about how the co-op is so much bigger than the ladder these days. I'm beginning to see that now, because in terms of the audience, the progressives are so much bigger, and that appeals to them. So I think, that's like, I think that is actually, now the more I'm thinking about this, more I think this is actually necessary in RTS. If you're building a new RTS, you need something that appeals to these players. And I think that's just, I think that's a really cool idea, and it's like a room for evolution in RTSs.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make. I mean, I think of it, and I'm going to use the RPG problem, is PvE versus PvP. I hate playing multiplayer against other people because I know I'm going to get my ass kicked. That makes me not want to play. I mean, you don't want to play and know you're going to lose. But I love comp stomping with my friends. I mean, then you get in that social interaction, you're having fun. And if you lose, well, then you all lost. Big deal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a question then. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, we know that most people are casual and prefer single-player experiences or co-op experiences. But our RTSs have always done really strong single-player... Well, they've done single-player experiences. I won't maybe go that far as say strong single-player experiences. But do you not also think that the lack of people getting hooked, the delayed gratification, it's also... It's a big problem in single player. It's not just a problem of multiplayer.
In the single player RTS, you mean?
Yeah, like if you play a single player campaign, you're still going to have the issue of people not getting hooked. They'll play it for a couple of hours and go, eh.
Well, I think it was Greg Black who worked for EA and Blizzard. He said
I love Greg Black.
Yeah, he's awesome. I think he said that around 70% of people who bought StarCraft 2 finished the campaign, but then it was only like 20 or 30% of those people ever touched the multiplayer. So I think campaigns generally have good finish rates. Yeah, see? And because like people will, maybe come back for achievements or things like that, but I think generally campaigns have strong finish rates. But I obviously have no data on that, so just what Greg said.
But that's the feeling
I
I
would
get
believe
from a lot
that.
of my friends.
Yeah, sounds right.
I would totally believe that. I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive, though, Callum. I think that I mean, just based on what you said before, using the King of the Hill example, I think that if we had, if we were able to turn back time, 4 years, and design the game in such a way as you start with the King of the Hill mode, and then we built out from there, we probably would have had a lot more success initially than we did.
Yeah, so let's change up gears, because there's a subject that I want to talk about, and it's relevant to this. Have you guys ever played 0K?
I have not.
Yes.
I don't think so.
Okay, so what 0K is? It's one of those Total Annihilation clones. You can't see me, but I did like the air quotation fingers. I mean, it's like it's in Spring RTS, which is like an open source thing where you can make your own RTS games, and it has like, it's just sort of, it reproduces Total Annihilation, but it adds like a lot of stuff. But you play it and you go, oh yeah, this is Total Annihilation, but it's a good sort of modernization of it, and it's free. It was previously, you had to play it through some like, you had to download it from somewhere, but now it's just through Steam for free, and that has an interesting business model. I mean, it's I shouldn't say business model because it's free. I should say it has an interesting product design in terms of how it's handled. So the way that 0K works is, if you take the campaign. When you play the campaign, you start the game off and you have like 4 or 5 things. You have a metal extractor, you have a energy collector, a factory, and then you have like 2 units, and that's it. And then each campaign mission, you unlock like an extra couple of units, but then you can choose what your next mission is, and like each mission is like, you're playing the regular game. You're not playing like a version of the game. Okay, so how do I explain this? So when you normally play an RTS game, like a campaign, what is it? What it is you have 10 units, and then you control 10 units, and then you kind of do things in like a semi-RPG sense. It's not like this is your base, and then you got to collect resources. Like that base building RTS element is normally introduced much later on. Like your 4th mission, now you have a base, and up until that point, you just have like a bunch of units you control. But in 0K, like as soon as you start the game, you have a base. It's like, this is your base, this is your commander, and you can do some stuff, but it's very limited. And as each mission, which goes for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, you get a new unit, you unlock something else. And so what it does is it introduces you to the RTS mechanics. You build a base, collect resources, build units, attack. But it does it in such a simplified way that you get the progression where you expand out and you get an extra unit every mission that you complete. But it doesn't sort of do it in a way that is so brain dead in like most RTS campaigns. So that's the issue that I have with RTS campaigns, is that generally they're just effortless, and you start with a bunch of units and you just sort of attack, move around. But I think this is an interesting approach.
I was gonna say Tooth and Tail does something kind of similar, because even their campaign maps are seed generated, and so they're not like scripted. You just start with a base and they gradually introduce a unit or 2. Because it's a very strange way to do a campaign, but it does kind of fit that similarity of what you were talking about, where it's just, here's your base and you get 1 or 2 more units per mission.
So what do you think about that, Brian?
Well, I mean, I played it.
I'm not sure if that's good or not. I'm just saying that's just that. I think that was an example that fit what you were trying to say.
Yeah, I've only played the game for like 10 minutes, so
Well,
I
it's
know
free now.
basically what you're talking about. Oh yeah, but my addictions are varied. Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure that it necessarily is going to come across to other people who haven't played it yet, because it's like, I think on the surface it kind of sounds like, well, how's that different from anything from just like play this, unlock a unit, play that, unlock a unit. But yeah, it does flow in a non-stereotypical. I'm not even sure how to put it into words, honestly.
Yeah, I was having trouble describing it. I mean, so I'm obviously a hardcore enthusiast of RTS, and I like playing multiplayer normally, and I can normally get bored by single player campaigns because I sort of described why. But I actually enjoyed the single player of 0K, and I only spent maybe like an hour or two with it, but like I kept playing that because it introduced me to the game straight away. The difficulty, I could put it to hard if I wanted to, which I did, and I liked the way that it introduced the units, and I think perhaps that's a better approach to the single player campaigns. Where normally the way that single player campaigns work is it's just sort of you just sort of go through the motions, but you don't actually do anything yourself. You just sort of you
hit
you're gonna
triggers.
win. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Do you think
I'm not sure
that?
if that's
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
not sure if that's better. It's different. I wouldn't enjoy that personally, but I like the scripted campaign. But like that campaign obviously doesn't appeal to you, so maybe having something like that in a game would still be helpful. I'm not saying it's bad or good. It's just everyone has different preferences on that type of thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think possibly from like an overall design point of view, having the single player campaign being this traditionally like distinct, like separate from the multiplayer, different pacing, different feel, like hitting triggers, like whatever you want to call it. I think a lot of people have actually found that like pretty good over the years, because like a lot of my friends, like that's all they want to play in the RCS. Like a lot of my friends have Starcraft, just did the campaign, loved it, don't want to touch the rest. And I kind of think like what we were saying earlier about like diversifying the types of play experience available to bring in a bigger audience and make the game more appealing to like more people. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's like maybe that is the right place for the single player campaign in some RTSs. I mean, I'm with you, Callum. I find them like boring, like totally boring AF, so I don't play them. But like my friends love them, and they're not, so that's cool. I think maybe there's a place for that kind of thing. But I'm all up for diversity, and that certainly sounds very interesting in what they're doing in 0K.
Yeah, I love those campaigns. I mean, not because they're kind of brain dead, but more because I think people like me, we like going through the story and finding out the lore and why what is this thing we're playing? Why are we playing it? What's the purpose behind it? So for us, it's more of a lore type gameplay thing rather than going through the motions of just like doing it. But going back to 0K, Callum, do you think that part of what makes that work is that there are a gazillion additional units on the horizon?
Yeah, and you see it as well, like the tech tree, like it shows it to you.
Yeah,
that's the way that it's presented to you is really good. I mean, and obviously, like I sort of have the advantage of like it's a TA clone and I know how to play TA. But yeah, that the reason why what you're sort of referring to is that it gives you like, oh man, I want to get 100 units. 0K doesn't even have multiple factions; it only has one faction. But it's okay because you have like 150 units. You have like 10 different factories. You start the game off and you're like, okay, do I want to build a cloak factory, a vehicle factory, a tank factory, a bot factory, a jump jet factory, an aircraft factory, a helicopter factory? Like I'm not even kidding. Like you have that many factories when you start the game off.
Yeah, so I mean, you get all that nuance that would normally split across multiple factions for a campaign, all in one.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the problem with like the status quo of like, oh well, the campaigns work fine, is the status quo of RTS is kind of failing. Like we're in this state of decline. There isn't a lot of good RTS games coming out. So what I'm thinking of is like, how do we really make RTS appeal to new people? And that's why.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Finish your sentence.
That's why I like the idea of mini games, because I think mini games can bring in non-RTS people.
For me, I think if we're going to look at like how to draw new players, we should look at what already works and what doesn't work as well. And I think the fact that campaigns are like the major selling point for most RTS games in general. Mm-hmm. Like if they made a new Red Alert game, people are going to buy that for the campaign. Or a new Starcraft or a Warcraft, those are going to draw people because of the campaigns. For a new IP, a campaign might not be as important because maybe there's not that pre-existing attachment to it. But I think I wouldn't call the campaign the cog that's like rusty and needs to be changed per se. But that's just from my experience. I'm not sure what other developers might say though.
I think. I know I would agree with you on that. For instance, Sons of Solar Empire doesn't have a campaign. We have like a fairly straightforward tutorial, and that's about it. The whole game's sandbox. And we actually got, for years now, complaints from players. why isn't there a campaign? We want to know about the lore and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, well, that's take that into account for future if there's ever one. But yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's the campaign is the problem. I think, based on our discussion and so far, I think Callum has definitely got a good point as use a mini game as kind of like both the teaching and the launching point to get non-traditional players in, because I think you can get the strategy players like us in no matter what. If the game looks good, we're going to play it. But there aren't enough of us anymore to really make the genre grow. So you got to kind of get the mobile guys in there and other people who would normally just not even bother.
Well, can I pose a question then? It's kind of a two-part. What determines what makes a successful RTS? Is it sales or player population after X years? And secondly, can an RTS be a success without multiplayer?
So on the first one, ultimately it's always money. Let me correct that. Initially it's money, right? Because you need to make back your investment and make a profit. But past that point, just player population, whether they're in multiplayer or not, is important, because the more people who continue to play your game after it's past that break-even point, like past year one or whatever, that's what creates a lasting franchise. That's what gets people wanting a sequel, wanting to keep playing, wanting to buy DLC, that sort of thing. They become dedicated into your game. There's a number of ways you can do that. Modding has worked really well for Sins with Solar Empire, for instance. So yes. On the second part, what was the second question again?
Can an RTS be successful without multiplayer? Can it single player and co-op and other modes be strong enough to carry it without a ladder?
Without a ladder, I would say.
Well, without any PvP,
yes.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So like, say if Stark would say Warcraft 4 gets released and doesn't have multiplayer, will it sell enough copies and be have enough other modes to keep people around without multiplayer?
I think that question depends on the core design of the RTS in question. So, for example,
I guess there's We Are Billions, or is like a single player RTS.
Right. Like if you came out with Warcraft 4 and it had an interesting progression system using like a skill tree, and then it also had like randomly generated levels with a decent AI director who could like direct units and also come up with like thematic maps on the fly, and it let you play with friends, I could see myself playing that for a good old time without ever wanting to play any PvP if the game was built with that in mind and it had the functionality and the support for that. Yeah. Is that a conventional RTS? Or is there anything like that on the market? No. So that's and is anyone even thinking about doing that? I have no idea. I think it's possible.
I don't know either.
Well, it sounds interesting. I'd buy it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think there definitely is a market for that kind of game, and that it could be successful. It really, my term for it is churn, which is probably not appropriate, but it's just how I think of it. Is like I want to get the player into the game, and I want them to keep playing. I want them to keep enjoying it, finding something new, having a good time, whether it be by themselves or with their friends. I don't really care if they buy DLC or expansions or whatever. I just want them playing the game, which is how free-to-play works, except for free-to-play wants your money.
Well, and I guess that's the thing, is if you have a free-to-play model, you want multiplayer because you want people to keep logging in. Whereas if you do a pay-up-front model, you're fine if they just buy it for the campaign because they've paid you your money and they've enjoyed your product. And if they keep playing, that's a bonus. And so pay model obviously depends as well.
I think for the sake of like DLC and sequels and creating content that advertises the game to other people, you do want a reason for them to keep playing. And traditionally that's multiplayer, but it doesn't have to be PvP multiplayer. It could be co-op, or it could be procedural generation of campaigns. So I think Ardennes Assault does that, where like every time you play it's different. You have like Dawn of War Dark Crusade, where you could play that like 7 times because it's just to do with, it's like a battle map that you fight over.
Was a great example of that.
Yeah, Dark Crusade was really good.
There was some designs. There's so much design space there that I would be excited to see explored more.
I think.
Sorry, it's a bit of a digression. My bad.
No, I mean that's cool. Yeah, you would have to find a way to keep people playing in the long term, So you have to find alternatives.
Yeah, if you have enough other modes, you could. I was just wondering because like so much of the topic of a successful RTS stems from how big is our population. So let's say if Ashes, if it sold 1 million copies but it had 0 multiplayer, online, would it be a successful game?
It would be a successful game, but not a successful franchise, probably.
Okay. You'd feel good, like we made money, but no one wants to keep. No one's playing our multiplayer.
Yeah,
I guess.
I mean, you'd probably, because it made a bunch of money, you might make a sequel. It really depends on like what the deeper feelings of the community are. But if no one's playing it, if you have like the multiplayer aspect, right, and no one's on there after the fact, you did something pretty wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why did they jump ship?
Like of an RTS game, maybe not even RTS, just of a game what did you say? It was a successful game, but not a successful franchise?
I didn't catch the first part. You kind of blacked out.
Can you think of an example? Like, what is an example of whether it's an RTS, if that's even better, or maybe just a game in general that was a successful game but a weak franchise? For sort of a point that you mentioned.
Like people bought it and enjoyed it but didn't keep playing it.
Like Avatar as a movie. Like that was a successful movie, but no one's gonna watch the sequels. People don't care about that movie.
I think that also relates to bad reviews because the game can be well reviewed, sell well, and then not have a big population.
Yeah.
Like I feel like Deserts of Karak is it sold fairly. I mean, it didn't sell gangbusters, but it sold fairly well, and you know what, the homeworld name helps there too. But its multiplayer population is very small, but it was very well reviewed too. It was all highly praised.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty difficult question. I mean, we know that people play Supreme Commander Forged Alliance still.
Oh yeah.
They're very passionate about it. Obviously, there's
myself.
never going to be another game in that franchise for a while, if ever. I mean, it was successful. It was a successful game. It's a successful-ish franchise.
Who actually owns the license to Supreme Commander?
Square
Enix.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Or here, take it more to that recent example. Age of Empires 4. Was it 4 that's coming out?
Yeah,
4.
Yeah, that's a relic one.
Age of Empires 2 HD is still, it's more played than Company of Heroes 2 on Steam right now. And I imagine that Age of Empires 4 will sell well just because the name, people want to play it just for nostalgia's sake. But I'd wager a year after it comes out, Age of Empires 2 will still be the more played game in terms of multiplayer population. And that might be a good example of a game where one will sell well, but it might not have the population of an older game.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's true.
And so why do you think that will be the case?
Well, I think there's obviously a measure of familiarity with Age of Empires 2. It's 20 years old now or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe there's just that I liked it back in the day. I don't play it much anymore, but maybe there's just that little thing they like and they don't want to let go of that. And maybe that's why Age of Empires 3 didn't keep its population as well either. Is it just didn't have that little thing that Age of Empires 2 had that people like. I don't know what that is, but
Je ne sais quoi.
Well, and it's like Warcraft 3 is still hugely popular in China, or Starcraft 1 is still bigger than Starcraft 2 in Korea.
So people who like the name are going to buy it, and that's a lot of people. But actually, if the game doesn't have the feel, or if it doesn't actually have the dynamics, or whatever it is people like I don't even know what that is about Age of Empires 2. I thought that was terrible. But whatever. If it doesn't have that, then they're not going to stick around and play it. They're going to go back to what they like. But they'll still take a punt on buying a new game in that series with that name because hey, what if it's great? You probably want to experience it, see if it's any good.
Yeah.
Yeah, the RTS games more than any other genre compete with old titles, because it's something that you can spend hundreds and thousands of hours playing. An RTS game 10 years ago is a competition. Starcraft 2, Age of Empires 2, these games are competition for new ones in a way that, if there's Half-Life 3, Half-Life 2 isn't a competitor. In fact, it's the opposite. So that's one of the challenges for RTS is you have to think about how are we going to draw people in from the older games. Also because the graphics and the presentation of RTS games tends to be a lot more stagnant than other types of games where it's less CPU intensive.
Sorry. That got me thinking actually is an RTS is a learned skill. So when StarCraft 3 or Warcraft 4 or the next Command & Conquer comes out, I'm going to want to play them, but I'm also going to oh, but I already know how to play StarCraft 2 so well. It's like if the mechanics are so different, it might be hard for me to want to learn it. And so I think just total side thought, if I'm going to develop an RTS, I want mechanics or at least controls that are similar enough that RTS fans aren't going to be like, oh, this is too different. I don't want to give up my learned skill in my main RTS, because I think most RTS players have a main RTS, so to speak. That they play.
Yeah, and we actually do take that into account, and it's as an unspoken rule, the industry kind of like tries to liberate those things and across games, because you're absolutely right. People will not play something if you completely change up what they expect the controls to be like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with Command and Conquer 4 and Dawn of War 3 is that they change too much, and it's fine if they change a lot, but if they don't do it for a good reason, if they just kind of just do it willy-nilly for the sake of it, it's a big risk changing the gameplay so radically, which is why I think if you want to appeal to new people, rather than changing the game itself, change the ways that people can access the game, i.e., mini games. Like I just really like mini games, okay, and I just want to validate my opinion.
We know what you like, okay.
Yeah.
Can I like ask a question that is like kind of on my mind about how RCS is going and like the evolution of the genre?
Sure.
Okay, so like when we're talking about accessibility and things, like one thing that's been a staple throughout the history of RCS is that basically they're played with a keyboard and mouse and one monitor. Like there are exceptions to this. People do new things. Some people use two monitors, whatever, that's fine. But we're like in an age now where like actually sitting in front of one monitor with a keyboard and mouse is like a little bit retro. Like, like a lot of genres, a lot of kinds of games. Like people aren't actually doing that like that much. Like, and we've got a lot of really sweet technology that, like, from an RTS point of view, hasn't been explored at all. For example, we've got like these awesome like Oculus visors and things. We've got things that let you manipulate stuff in 3D space. We've got people doing like paintings and sculpture in 3D using visors and things in their hands. We've got eye tracking, which you can actually just rig up to StarCraft 2 for a completely different experience, which is reportedly, I've not tried it, amazing. So I guess my question to you guys is, to what extent do you think advances in technology and like stuff that lets you interface with a game in a different way could make RTS more accessible? Because like personally, if I was to like try and answer my own question, I think I have a lot of friends who like the idea of sitting here and doing control groups and doing macro and all that kind of thing, pretty intimidating. But if they could like look around and see the map and like zoom way up and then like, throw the map to one side with both hands, then like grab it and like grab their units, move it around, do something. I don't know. That could be an appealing experience, which it might be easier to like sell people on it. But I don't know. What do you think?
And I'd like to bring up StarCraft 64 first of all. But that's actually one thing. AirMech has a lot of issues as a mobile RTS hybrid, but they actually have a VR version where like you reach down and you grab the units with your hands.
Oh, that's so
and
cool.
you like. Yeah, they do.
Oh,
and it's I've never played it, but I've just seen the videos on Steam, and it looks really interesting. Well, and obviously we have Halo Wars as well, which is iffy on its control scheme, but does work better than I thought it would. Halo Wars 1 and 2 on the Xbox. But VR would be interesting. I want to try AirMech's version just because it's a little more simplified. So.
Mm-hmm.
See, I have opinions about this. See, I think you gotta look at like why people play RTS and does that correlate with the technology?
Well, it's not very micro intensive to just pick it up.
Well, what I mean is it's like playing an RTS. Even for the casual people, it's still a pretty. It depends. This is getting semantics, but it's still kind of a hardcore experience in terms of like I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna play this for 3 or 4 hours straight. Whether it's the campaign, whether it's the multiplayer, and VR, like, and we can talk about 3D. Like, I bought a 3D monitor, and I played, like, Dota and StarCraft with a 3D monitor, and it was cool at first, but the novelty wears off. Those things like 3D and VR, those are things that you want to play for 20 minutes, and you want to put them down after that because your eyes hurt, because VR and 3D makes your eyes hurt. And so I think...
Yeah, sorry.
RTS games, as a genre that you generally spend a lot of time with, and you generally, you're sitting down for a while, it seems to contradict those types of interactions with, the peripherals that are only really good for a short amount of time, just because they get uncomfortable after a while. The genres that'll work really well with VR are genres that you can sort of you can play a bit more, pick up, put down, and without having to commit so much time, and where you don't want to play that for 5 hours because it'll just get weird after a while.
I think if you're trying to like hack those peripherals onto like what we think of as being like present RTSs, like if you're trying to play Starcraft on a 3D monitor or in VR, like, or something, I think that's necessarily like a very good idea at all. I can see how that would be like quite a gimmicky thing, but I think if you built an RTS, I don't even know how it would look because I'm not like the creative mind. I'll come back to you with that one. I'll come back to you. But
Can we get like a new black and white where you're literally God and you're just picking up?
I don't conceptually know what it is, but I just know that those are tools which can be used in pretty fantastic ways. And as for using them for an X amount of time, I don't know. Like people work with these things for like hours at a time, and I've got a visor and a control set, and I play like Elite Dangerous for for a few hours at a time.
I think you could do city builders, you could do tower defense games. I think you could do a lot of RTS style games, but I don't think you could do a traditional RTS.
I don't think you could either, but it's like, I'm just wondering if there's design space there for the genre in the future, maybe.
Well, does it even have to be VR? Could it be AR? Because I could see AR working a bit better than VR for RTS if you're, especially if you're just modifying an existing one.
Can you imagine if you could just like knock over some books in your front room and you and your friend play in like AR, like, then that's the map?
Yeah.
Dude,
I think that'd be cool.
How cool would that be?
There used to be like an Army Men or like Toy Soldiers RTS.
Rings a bell, yeah.
It was like a GameCube or something. Army Men, yeah.
Oh, that was on PC.
It was played in like kids' rooms and stuff like that, where the battlefields were. So.
Well, the whole franchise, like you would, it was like a third-person shooter and like a top-down shooter initially. Yeah, and you play as like those army soldiers, like the painted ones, and you would fight in kitchens and you would shoot like cockroaches and stuff. Like you would have to kill cockroaches. It was actually a really cool series.
Yep, it was 3DO.
I'd like to see it test out, but I do think there's, for the publisher at least, there's probably a little fear of the cost. You have to, because you're hitting a very small market because I don't know what percentage of the population has any form of VR.
Tiny.
Yeah.
So it's
That's actually.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. Like right now, no, I think you'd have to be like suicidal, like financially suicidal to try and develop the kind of thing that I'm talking about. But I'm talking about,
let alone an
15,
RTS
20
VR.
years, like, is there perhaps a future for RTS? Like,
I like to play a game like that. I don't know if it. Yeah, I think there's space for it.
I think there's space for it. I think that ultimately, right, the way where the market is right now, there isn't enough of an install base for that kind of game to make money. I mean, that's one of the things that's threatening to kill VR right now. Again, is no one's making any money. So I think that if we're going to see that, we'd probably see it from like a company like Valve, which is championing VR both from a hardware perspective and from a game perspective. But they don't make strategy games, so who knows?
They don't make any games, Brian.
Well, no, they're working on.
They're making a card game.
Yes, they're making a card game. They say they're working on 3 VR games, so they're doing something.
Oh, and they bought the people who did the walking simulator in the forest with the camping, and he's a ranger or something like that.
DS though?
Firewatch.
Yeah, Firewatch. They bought that.
Yeah. That was like a month or so ago. Right?
Damn.
I'm not sure.
It wasn't a very big company. Wasn't it only like 4 or 5 people?
Yeah, but that's. I guess technically you're probably more second party than first party in that case.
Right.
Well, we can change the topic. What have you been playing lately, Topher?
Recently I have been getting back into Deserts of Karak. The population saw a little bit of a little boom. Boom as in now there's like 100 people on. But I've really, I've really been enjoying. It had a really good campaign, and then the multiplayer is just so cinematic. I'm like, I'll play against just an easy AI to see what beautiful things I can make. It's just like, how can I make the best explosion with railguns?
Nice.
It's just a beautiful game, and so I've been really enjoying that. And then I obviously need to get my fix in Starcraft 2. So those are the two I've been enjoying the most right now.
Nice. See, I feel like I sort of was ruined a bit with RTS for a while because, like, when an RTS game comes out, I don't just think about, man, I hope this game is fun. I think about, man, I hope I can shoutcast it. I hope I can do casts for it. I hope people will watch my YouTube videos. And so then when an RTS game comes out and there isn't that potential for it, like Age of Empires Definitive Edition, I didn't even buy that because there was no replays.
Right.
So I was like, well, there's no
It
point
didn't come with
playing it.
replay?
Age of Empires Definitive Edition does not have replays.
That's so basic.
Yeah, because I don't know if they remade it from scratch, because like it looked like it was remade because it's like 3D now rather than 2D. But yeah, there was no replays, so I was like, well, I can't be bothered playing this game without replays that I can't cast. But I kind of wish that I did. And same with like Deserts of Karak. Like I really enjoyed when I played it, but I was just like, well, there's no replays. I can't cast it. What's the point? But that was sort of back when I was trying, like where YouTube was way more important for me. That was before I was working for Starcraft. And so I actually kind of had to think financially about like, what's the future of my channel going to be?
So are there any RTSs on the horizon that you're looking forward to? I haven't heard of any.
The name blanks me. Iron Harvest looks amazing.
Oh,
Iron
yeah,
Harvest.
yeah.
The
Iron
Harvest,
Harvest.
like 1920s.
Tell me about Iron Harvest.
So it's like the gameplay looks like Company of Heroes, and they're making no attempt at hiding that, and they sort of embrace it.
And it's like steampunk too. It's
walking mechs and like
1920s plus. It's based on a bunch of paintings by some Polish, I think it's Polish painter, and it's like this alternate sort of history, and the art style is just gorgeous, and there's like videos of the gameplay. It looks really good. And I have been in contact with one of the designers who said at some point he'll come talk to me on a podcast. So I'm keen for that. I mean, that looks amazing. I just hope they don't sort of stuff it up. Like the thing is with my feelings of Company of Heroes 2 is it's like 97% amazing, but there's 3% on the surface that kind of just ruins the game in terms of like faction design, in terms of certain mechanics like abandon, and things and like main gun grids and things like that. Those little things really ruin the experience, even if the game is almost entirely awesome. And that's my skepticism, is that this game looks cool, it's probably going to be awesome, but I hope they don't ruin it with certain things that may on the surface may seem kind of innocent, but then once you spend more time with it, you're like, man, this is really frustrating.
Another one that just came out recently, but it's more of a real-time tactics, is Ancestors Legacy. I don't know if you guys seen anything about that.
Yeah, I played the beta of it. I didn't bother playing the full game, not yet.
Okay. Yeah, I've just seen videos. I just know it came out like last week out of beta. So
that's similar to Company of Heroes again.
It's like squad based, right?
It's squad based, yeah, and it's like you have all these they have melee squads and you have like archers, and I mean it's pretty tactical in terms of like there's flanking and it's like Company of Heroes combined with Total War, because you have morale and like retreating and stuff. It was fun when I played it, but it sort of went back to my previous talking point, which I was thinking about when I was saying it, is it had some really weird faction design quirks. Like you sort of had this rock, paper, scissors because there was different unit types. There was like swordsmen, spearmen, and archers, and then there was the cavalry. And there was 4 factions, and each faction would start with a different unit type. So if I start with the swordsman, and you start with the spearman, your early game sucks balls. Until you get like tier 2 or tier 3, you can't count on my dudes. So it was weird. The way there wasn't enough points of interest on the map. There was only like 2 or 3 things you would fight over. For the RTT types to really work well, you have to have a lot of points of interest, which is why Company of Heroes works well. Not only is there a lot of resources, you also have like buildings and cover positions. You have a lot of sort of subtle points of interest on top of the very clear points of interest. So, yeah, anything you're looking forward to?
No.
Yeah, this is where we're at, right? Like, this is why we're talking about accessibility, because we're like, nothing good is coming out.
I got nothing.
Yeah. I was actually just literally having this discussion with a couple of my friends the other day. I was like, there's basically nothing on the horizon I'm looking forward to. Iron Harvest, I've forgotten its name, but me and my friends, we are anticipating that one. Like, but beyond that, it's like the RTS scene there's just not too much on the up and coming that's that exciting.
We also are coming off of like a busy period, because we did just have Empires Apart and Forged Battalion and Northgard and Driftland all come out within the past like 6 months or so. And not all they're all very different. Like Forged Battalions is nothing like Empires Apart, but we did just get through like a little bit busier a time. But right now, yeah, it's like nothing.
Yeah, but they're all just so mediocre. You know, like every petroglyph game ever is just the same shit. Empires Apart was like, well, it's an Age of Empires clone. Like, okay.
It was better than the edition they did though of Age of Empires.
Are they the people who made the Asgard one? Is that or was one like the Viking one? What was that one called? Somebody mentioned
Age of Mythology.
No. There's like
Northgard.
Like Northgard. That's
I
Thank
need
you.
to play
I
that.
like Northgard.
Northgard is interesting. For me, it doesn't feel like an RTS. It's more like a real-time Civ 5. The way that like expansion, it's a neat game. The way that like the expansion works, the way that you have to manage your people's happiness and you have to manage your like consumption of food, but it's in real time. And then like the winter comes, and then like you have to stockpile resources. It's a really fun game. There was some issues with the campaign. But it's also like a really nice presentation. It's a really nice art style. The music's really nice. It is a fun game. You might like it, Brian, if you just want like a chill, zone out single player RTS. I lost you there for a second.
Hey,
Yeah,
is anyone else getting a bit of a beer crush?
Yeah, it's all just bogged down.
Okay.
Man,
Robot
thought the
voice.
internet would be better in America, but clearly I was wrong.
Am I coming back? I've got the video coming back up.
Everything's really staticky for me.
Yeah.
I think somehow like Discord servers.
All right. Well, maybe we can end the podcast here. I think it was about that point anyway.
All right.
And yeah, but I think with exhausted the topic pretty well. So it's been interesting, and I'll have to have a think about what we can talk about next time. I do have a few ideas. Like I think, talking about team games is something that's been rather neglected. I think with RTS games, like most RTS games that do team games do a pretty shitty job of it. So I think there's a lot to analyze, like which RTS games have done it well, why the ones that don't do it well, why they fail, and so forth. But yeah, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks for the chat, guys. It's been fun.
Thank you.
And,
Thanks very much, Ryan. That was really cool. It's been really good to meet you guys and hear your perspective. Some really interesting stuff to say.
Thanks for sharing.
yeah. I have everyone's Twitter handles, apart from Brian, who I'm pretty sure doesn't even have Twitter, right?
I do.
Oh,
put it in
well, too late. Because I have just as part of the overlay on the OBS. But all right, see you later.
All right, bye.